Okay, welcome everyone to the Palo Alto Council Candidate Green Transportation Forum. Our goal over the next 90 minutes is to discuss green transportation issues, including active transportation like bikes, walking, and e-scooters, and other transportation alternatives that reduce CO2 emissions like shuttles, transit, trains, and carpools. I am your moderator for this forum. My name is Robert Neff. I've been a Palo Alto resident for 25 years and have served on the Palo Alto Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee since about 2010, including some time as chair. I currently represent Palo Alto on the County VTA Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, as well as working to organize a local event, Bike Palo Alto, for about the last 5 years. But for today, I'm working to channel my inner Joe Simidian. So if I start talking too quickly, then please remind me to channel a little bit more of Joe. I want to share something quickly. Whoop, where'd it go? Where's the sharing? There's the screen share. Something about the attendees for this forum. So this is a chart that shows this was an audience survey we had of the attendees, and you can see that of the people who signed up, many of them bike or walk as their primary transportation choices, and then many even as their secondary transportations, bike or walk, and then this other one is of course using driving themselves. Of particular interest to our audience were programs to increase green transportation trips, infrastructure to make green transportation safer and convenient, and then road safety for all users, ages, and skill levels. Okay. What are you doing? Okay, stop sharing. Okay. Viewers, thank you for signing up. And okay, this forum has two sponsors. The Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. BikeSiliconValley.org is a nonprofit that works to make biking safer and more comfortable in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties through education, advocacy, and fun. SVBC has helped organize this, providing technical know-how in their own Zoom account. Walk Bike Palo Alto, www.walkbikepaloalto.org, is our group of local citizens who has put this together, including first a questionnaire for our candidates, and now this forum. You can see the candidates' responses to the questionnaire on the website. If you are interested in promoting walking and bicycling in Palo Alto, please get in touch. This forum would not happen without the collaboration of this group of 10 candidates for Palo Alto City Council. We appreciate them taking the time to fill in our survey and to join this forum, and their commitment to serve our community on City Council. These are smart, committed community members willing to take the many hours every week to engage with their community, with city staff, with each other, finding the solutions to make Palo Alto a great city and a leading municipality. Let's review the mechanics of this forum. For viewers, you will be muted, and if you have issues, you can send a chat message to the hosts for resolution. Most of the forum answers will have a 1-minute time limit. We will be sharing a stopwatch app, which you should be able to see on your, now, to everyone. For best speaker viewing, select Speaker View in Zoom. Then go to the View Options pull down and select Side-by-Side mode. You should see both the speaker and the stopwatch. Viewers can reduce the size of a shared stopwatch by pulling the slider bar in the center of the screen to one side to make the speaker view large and the stopwatch small. As we go through the forum, the procedure is that we will be asking the candidates questions in a random order. So I'll be introducing the first speaker, alerting the one who will follow, asking the question, and then reintroducing the first speaker before they begin. We also have a few lightning round questions which will have brief answers, yes or no, a phrase up to 1 sentence. Between speakers, I'll introduce the next speaker, alert the one on deck, and briefly prompt the question again to the next speaker. We plan to put a copy of each question into the chat, the Zoom chat, as we go. Okay, any questions? All right, let's go. I gotta rearrange my screen, just a minute. Okay, all right. The first speaker will be Ajit Varma. Please introduce yourself, including your personal choices for daily transportation. This will be Ajit Varma to be followed by Raven Malone. You'll have 60 seconds. Take it away, Ajit.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone. I believe this is a really important organization. So my name is Ajit Varma. I am a product director at WhatsApp. I moved to Palo Alto about 20 years ago. And during that time, I've held a variety of like engineering and product management positions within the Bay Area, working at places like Google and Square. So I'm really focused on how do we recover from COVID. So one thing about stay at home is I actually ended up selling my car within the first month of stay at home. And so that was like really liberating. And now my primary mode of transportation is bicycle. I have one bicycle, and then for my kids, we have an electric bike. So we pretty much bike everywhere within the city. So it's been great. And I think that it's really important for us to have safe transportation. One of the reasons that I had actually stopped biking was because I was sideswiped by a car and broke my wrist. And so I know a lot of the importance of safety for biking. So I want to help as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajit Varma. Our next candidate will be Raven Malone, to be followed by Greer Stone. Please introduce yourself, Raven Malone, including your transportation choices. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Raven. I'm an electrical engineer. I've been a systems engineer for the past 8 years. And while a systems engineer, I've been the lead engineer for multi-billion-dollar programs, leading engineers with different opinions to get a project done by the deadline. I've done this many times as my job, and I believe my ability to collaborate with a variety of people will serve me well in the council. It's important to work with other council members and community members in order to make good decisions while keeping in mind the people who affect them. And city council will be successful when everyone feels welcome and can thrive, in my opinion. My primary form of transportation is driving. If somewhere is close enough, I will walk, but I'm from the South where we primarily only ride on sidewalks, so I'm not used to riding in the street yet, but I look forward to taking classes after shelter in place is fully lifted, and I plan on being in the street on my bike with everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven Malone. Our next speaker will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Stephen Lee. So Greer, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My primary modes of transportation is walking, bicycle, then driving. I'm running because I believe I have the experience, temperament, and understanding of this community to help lead us through these difficult times. Palo Alto has reached an inflection point. Both the pandemic and the social unrest across the nation in furtherance of Black Lives Matter have shown a light on the injustices pervasive across our nation and here at home. This unprecedented crisis has provided us a unique opportunity to have what many commentators have labeled a great reset. It's a small window of time where we can forego the antiquated systems that cause so many of our persistent problems like affordable housing, traffic, social injustice, and climate change, and instead forge ahead with a future that is diverse and equitable. I believe my experience as a teacher at both Pali and Gunn High Schools, attorney, chair of the Midtown Residents Association, and the vice chair of the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission provide me the kind of experience necessary to tackle these complex issues and help create a better future for us all. I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club, Palo Alto Weekly, the Mercury News, Senator Jerry Hill, and many more. Thanks so much for being here on this beautiful afternoon. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Greer. Our next candidate will be Stephen Lee, to be followed by Lydia Koo. Stephen, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Lee. I'm a progressive Democrat running for Palo Alto City Council. I'm one of only 3 candidates endorsed by the County Democratic Party. And I want to thank the groups for organizing this event. You know, as a millennial, I understand that climate change, we face an existential crisis with climate change, and our inaction or delayed action over the next decade will leave my generation, millennials, and the next generation with some terrible consequences. So we really need to get serious about speeding up and taking bolder action to address climate change and green transportation. A few notes about my background. I attended UC Davis as an undergrad, one of the first platinum bike cities in America. So I know what good bike infrastructure looks like. When I was in law school in Durham, North Carolina, I served on the Durham Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. My primary modes of transportation right now is I drive a Prius when I'm trying to get to work or places far away. I like to bike and walk to the coffee shop down the road and to restaurants in the Midtown area.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker will be Lydia Koo, to be followed by Carrie Templeton. So Lydia, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you to all the organizers of this forum. My name is Lydia Koo, and my primary mode of transportation is my electric car. And I do walk, but mostly it's using the car. I believe the role of government is to improve the lives of its residents, not just through its services, but through the many other elements that make a community. These include our community serving businesses and businesses that improve jobs and tax revenues. My core platform has been to listen, to understand, and to represent. I believe a council member needs to listen to the many different perspectives and values of Palo Alto's residents and the other members of our community, to ask questions and understand what is being said, then to ensure all are being fairly represented in the decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Our next speaker will be Carrie Templeton, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg. So Carrie, please introduce yourself.
All right, thank you. Hello, I'm Carrie Templeton, and I am running to make the promise of Palo Alto available to everyone in our community. My primary modes of transportation are my electric car for distances, especially if I'm going downtown, and biking to the California Avenue area and to Mitchell Park, and then of course walking locally here in the neighborhood, which we've been doing a lot of during the COVID time. It's quite wonderful that the kids are now able to come with me during the day if they want to. I am hoping that we can get more action on our Sustainable Climate Action Plan. It's a great plan. We just need to take a little bit more time to work through it and to put the effort into making it a reality. So I'm really hoping that we can get in on more green transportation in Palo Alto. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Our next speaker will be Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Greg Tanaka. So Rebecca, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I am a seasoned lawyer and negotiator with 3 decades of accomplishment. Working with a wide range.
Her hair is still doing the weird thing.
Working with a wide range of personalities, I took PayPal public, brought housing to 500 service workers, and helped pass the federal legislation, Violence Against Women Act. I walk almost everywhere in terms of transportation. I walk because I usually bring my dog Zoe with me. Many of you have met her. When I do drive, I take my 2012 Leaf. It goes only about 30 miles, but that's as far as I need to go. If we do need to go further, we take our plug-in hybrid Subaru. We are a 4-trek family. My husband and son right now are off on their treks right now. Wisconsin company that I supported as a child too. I seek to join the City Council in order to deliver on the promise of bringing Palo Alto long overdue electric shuttles and green accessible public transportation, as well as protected bike lanes and pedestrian bridges. I'm a huge supporter of transit. I hope you'll support me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker will be Greg Tanaka, to be followed by Pat Burt. So Greg Tanaka, please introduce yourself.
Robert, thank you for moderating, and thank you for the organizers of this. So I started out my civic life in Palo Alto on the College Church Resident Association board as president. Actually, Kathy Durham was kind enough to rope me into this. Together, we worked on traffic calming programs in our neighborhood. We implemented the first residential permanent parking program, which has been incredibly successful and spread throughout the city. I then moved on to be on the Planning and Transportation Commission, including as chair. Kind of my big program there was the Cal Ave Streetscape project, kind of taking from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And then on the City Council, I've done a lot of work around pension reforms, the street closures on University Avenue and Cal Ave to handle the COVID situation. I'm currently chair of the Finance Committee. I hold office hours every Sunday, so I just ended my office hours a little bit early for this. And for me, I practice what I preach. I'm the only council member that consistently bikes to council meetings, rain or shine. So my favorite mode of transportation, 99% of the time, is either biking or skateboarding. And I'm running to really make sure that we have sensible spending during this recession, that we get more people biking safely.
Thank you, Greg. Our next speaker will be Pat Burt, to be followed by Ed Lowing. So Pat, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Pat Burt. I'm running for council as having been 20 years as an environmental policy leader, and then served 9 years on the Planning and Transportation Commission, 9 years on the City Council, and 2 terms as mayor. In those periods, I was able to have an active role in the adoption of the 2 different bicycle and pedestrian master plans. In 2016, I say the city really focused on the multimodal green transportation approach, and I've been very active in Safe Routes to School, the Bike Palo Alto program, promotion of micromobility. My primary mode of transportation is bicycling in town, and if I have to go out of town, I have a EV. And I'm grateful to having been endorsed by the Weekly, the Post, and the Mercury.
Thank you, Pat. Our last speaker then, it will be Ed Lowing. So Ed, please introduce yourself.
I will, thanks. Yes, I have a lot of city experience, having been on 2 commissions in the last 10.5 years, parks and now planning. So that, coupled with a private sector experience running startups primarily, and now as an executive recruiter. So I get government around here, I get business and how those decisions are made. The part on parks, I had a lot of things to do that were environmental and a bit on sustainability, on planning and transportation. I think there's never a disconnect between a land use project and transportation. They're always linked. And most recently, when we recommended to council that we open up CS zoning on San Antonio, I was one of few that insisted that we have the city commit to a transportation study there because of the already congestion. So we always have to look at those things. My primary mode of transportation is none. I've been working at home for 12 years. So.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Anyone who's not muted, well, let's keep going. All right, we're ready for our first question. This question will be directed to Greg Tanaka first, and the general area is Summer Streets. Summer Streets, now branded as Uplift Local, is the opening of California Avenue and University Avenue to pedestrian and bicycle traffic only. And it has provided the city with an opportunity to pilot converting a street to a pedestrian zone. How strongly would you support making these street modifications either seasonally recurring or permanent? So Greg Tanaka, you'll be the first speaker, and Ed, you'll be the second one. So Greg, please take it away on this Summer Streets question.
Thank you, Robert. So when I was on the Planning Commission, I had this idea of a pedestrian mall, kind of like 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. So I talked about it then. That was a little bit, the idea was unfortunately a little bit ahead of its time, but it's something that I've always thought would be really interesting. And unfortunately, because of COVID, it actually became reality. But I did a lot of work around this. I've held, I don't know, 6-7 office hours on this topic. You know, there was a lot of things that made it very kind of complicated, but to me, I think it's enabled the restaurants to get some boost in business that can help them survive. So I think that's been great. It's also made the street much more vibrant. It's been very successful. I would love to see it more to be either seasonal or permanent. I think right now we're kind of in pilot mode. We're trying to experimenting with different things. I think one of the big challenges right now are the side streets. The side streets, some of them are partially closed. Some are completely open. So not all the streets get the benefit from it. But I'd love to see it actually become permanent if possible.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Our next speaker will be Ed Lowing, followed by Ajit Varma. And the topic is summer streets and making them permanent, either seasonally recurring or permanent. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I think the Summer Streets program was a success in many ways and represented a very good comradeship between the city and the residents and the businesses. And everybody worked together, and there was good data to evaluate it, and then it was expanded. Part of the data said that not everybody was happy. So that's, if we're going forward with this, we have to make sure we broaden our data reach, certainly before we would decide to go permanent on this. Some of the retailers that were off the main streets thought it was bad. Some of the restaurants that thought it was bad. All of the consumers I talked with thought it was wonderful and a European experience in both downtowns, actually. So I would be strongly supportive of doing this seasonally. Obviously, the question is still out in the winter because of the weather. And I think we'd have to do much more research with the city and with other businesses to determine if we're doing it permanently, what the traffic flow would be, what the parking would be, how many businesses would be happy and how many wouldn't.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Our next speaker will be Ajit Varma, to be followed by Pat Burt on summer streets. Go ahead, Ajit.
So I live pretty close to University Avenue, and I think that the summer streets has been fantastic. I walk there 3 or 4 times a week. It's very vibrant, and there's a lot of opportunity to help businesses by opening it up. I would make it permanent year round. I think that that really helps with some of the limitations that I see with it today. So when you look today, there's like some odd patterns where some parts of the street are one way. There's some streets that still cut through University Avenue. And I think that you really have to make it permanent in order to really make it so that it is truly like a promenade, or as Greg mentioned, this like Santa Monica 3rd Street promenade like kind of feel, which sort of requires disclosure. I also think that when you permanent closure, you can put in permanent structures on the street as well. There's a lot of other things that you can do. So things that are temporary, I think, will be difficult. Also, I think for businesses that maybe not restaurants and may not need that sort of space, more retail, I think that the inconsistency, uncertainty actually hurts them, and they can move to side streets easily. Thanks.
Thank you, Ajit. Our next speaker will be Pat Burt, to be followed by Lydia Koo. So Pat Burt, your comments on summer streets.
Great. So I think it's been a great initiative. I was last night on Cal Ave, and I speak frequently with the restaurants there to really look at where they're going to go next with the upcoming winter impacts. I think Cal Ave really lends itself to a permanent closure because there's more than enough capacity on what is essentially a dead-end thoroughfare. I had actually led the initiative to launch the narrowing of the Cal Ave streetscape, and I think that this next step is really appropriate. I'm unsure whether we will be able to have a permanent closure on University, or whether we have some variation of that with permanent parkettes on not only University but the side streets. On Cal Ave, I think we are going to have surplus parking, so we can afford to eliminate some of that on-street parking because of the oversized parking garage that the council approved. And I think we need to support the businesses with streetscape furniture.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Our next speaker will be Lydia Koo, to be followed by Stephen Lee. So Lydia, your comments on this?
Certainly. I think the city has done a terrific effort in ensuring that some of the businesses, especially the restaurants, are able to operate again. It was a tremendous effort and a lot of collaboration. Now, the thing is, in terms of making it permanent, I agree with Pat that there are certain streets, California Avenue actually is a spot that might have some consideration with going permanent. University is a thoroughfare, and there is a lot of people who come in and go to the University, Stanford itself. So that has to be re-examined a lot more. I also believe that there needs to be very strong community engagement in this, not just in silo discussions with the businesses. We don't have only restaurants, we have retail, and I think that there needs to be reassurances to the community in general that the impacts will not be felt.
Thank you, Lydia. Our next speaker will be Stephen Lee, to be followed by Raven Malone. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, as much as I loved California Avenue and University before COVID-19, I love it even more. I love how dynamic and vibrant this outdoor dining options are, and I would be in favor of making it permanent. We see so many successful models that we can copy of this particular closure in Europe, and I know that we can make it work here in Palo Alto if we simply put our mind to it. I also think we need to give our local businesses some predictability and certainty that this is going to be permanent, so that they can actually make investments in these sort of furniture and other equipment that they need to make this work. That's the one piece of feedback that I've heard from a lot of small businesses, is they just don't know whether it's worth the investment. So I think this is worth doing. We need to prioritize people and our small businesses over vehicles and over vehicular traffic. We can make this work if we put our mind to it.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker will be Raven Malone, to be followed by Greer Stone. Raven, go ahead.
I would absolutely support Summer Streets becoming permanent. Making Cal Ave and University more walkable will not only give more space to our residents to enjoy those areas, but also make walking and biking in those areas much safer. A lot of restaurants that I've spoken to really love it, but some of our retail businesses have said that it's actually hurting their business. I think it's important that we do what we can to boost the retail business as well. So while supporting it being permanent, I would like to also work closer with the businesses in those areas to make sure that they can all thrive and be successful. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raven. Our next speaker will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Carrie Templeton. Greer?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'm going to echo Pat and Lydia here about makes absolute sense to close California Avenue. I think it works really well for this. University Avenue, I've really enjoyed the summer streets there. I think it's something that makes sense to continue to extend the street closure there. Not sure at this point. I think it's still too early on to see how changing of patterns of work and telecommuting and need for office and housing in downtown kind of will play out as far as closing University down permanently. I do think that decision needs to be made in collaboration with the business owners there, the retailers, as well as the residents in that area to make that determination. And then understanding that these impacts do have ripple effects throughout the city. One thing I would be concerned about is if the city goes ahead with closing Churchill and closing University Avenue, Embarcadero then really becomes the only thoroughfare from 101 to Stanford University and Town and Country and Pali. And so what does that mean for impacts along there?
I see. Thank you. Thank you, Greer. Our next speaker will be Carrie Templeton, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg. Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you very much. Before I moved out here 15 years ago, I lived for a few years in Germany and got to experience what a downtown that had pedestrian zones and was bike friendly and also had great public transit and places for cars if they had to drive from farther away. I really hope for that kind of experience for Palo Alto over the next 10 years. I think it's something that we can start with the Summer Streets program, and we can also add to. So I keep thinking about, in addition to the feedback we've gotten from businesses and people that are patronizing those businesses, we also can think about what can we do to make it better, and what other options besides keeping it open or closed can we do, like adding a shuttle that goes up and down University, or making the parking lots a better destination for cars and things like that. So I think we need to find a way to make it all work together, and I'm really hopeful. I would love to keep it open as long as possible.
Thank you, Carrie. Our last speaker on this topic will be Rebecca Eisenberg. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I support permanent closure. Removing cars from University Avenue and California Avenue has been fantastic. Quality of life has greatly increased. Car-free streets have already been shown to be a huge success, not only internationally, but also domestically. I lived in Venice Beach on a walk street for a year, and I witnessed firsthand how quality of life is increased by removing cars from the equation. I lived in San Francisco for 2 decades, and during that time watched the dramatic improvement that closing Market Street brought for the community. I recognize that the closure of Market Street was in part due to the extremely hard work of the San Francisco Bike Coalition. And although businesses were very nervous about having Market Street closed, ultimately they saw that their business was improved. I recognize that we need to have a great, strong system of local transit, such as electric shuttles, to make this possible, but I will bring that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. For the next question, the first responder will be Raven Malone. So this question is, here we are. Our sustainability plan framework states a 2030 goal to increase bike mode share, including work commute trips, from 7% to 25%. What kinds of programs and/or infrastructure improvements do you support to encourage more people to commute by bicycle to help the city of Palo Alto meet this ambitious goal? So as I said, our first candidate here will be Raven Malone, to be followed by Ed Lowing. So Raven, please give us your comments on programs or improvements to support bike commute goals.
First off, I think that it's really important that while encouraging people to use greener sources of transportation like bicycling, that we protect them while doing so. Building and implementing safer biking infrastructure will not only encourage more Palo Altans to make commutes by bike, but also reduce the amount of emissions that we're putting into the environment. So I strongly encourage protected bike lanes, bike boulevards, bike and pedestrian bridges, like one that we just found out is starting to be built today. I would like to see better infrastructure that not only encourages greener transportation, even if we're talking outside of bicycling, like light rails and shuttles, but it's really important that we do what we can to create greener and more sustainable Palo Alto for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven. Our next speaker will be Ed Lowing, to be followed by Ajit Varma. So programs or improvements to support our bike commute goals. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, the first two answers are safety and safety, meaning that we have to make the bike lanes safe themselves so that folks that are biking aren't scared of dying. And then when they get to the destination, they should have a safe place to store their vehicle so that it's there when they come out. When I answered this question in the survey, I noted that my wife works at Stanford and we're in Professorville, so it's a mile and a half. And I've been trying for 10 years to get her to ride the bike. And she's terrified that, going down Embarcadero, crossing El Camino, getting into Galvez, she wouldn't be the first one that was hit because it's just not safe. Ditto our discussion about San Antonio Corridor. So those are the two main things: make it safe one way and safe the other way. Safe for storage. But the last thing is just to try to find ways to make it fun so that people at least adopt this in their leisure life when they're driving out for coffee or just going out with a friend. And then maybe that'll carry over to their commute life.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Our next speaker will be Ajit Varma, to be followed by Lydia Koo. Ajit, programs or improvements to support bike commute goals.
So I would, again, emphasize safety. So there's a few things that have been identified, like there's dangerous intersections in Palo Alto. There have been bike deaths at those dangerous intersections. I think those are clear opportunities for improvement. I also really like the bike boulevards in the city. Things like Bryant Street have been controversial in the past to convert those into those bike boulevards. I think that's critical to have more of those. There's also, I think, a lot of the people who live in Palo Alto work in adjacent cities. So I work in Menlo Park. And so things like the Willow Bridge and the Willow improvements made it a lot safer for me to bike in that direction. The bike bridge over 101, I think, is another thing that's helpful. In addition to safety, though, I think another important part of really hitting this goal is density. So people have to be able to live closer to where they work. And so that means that we need a lot more housing in Palo Alto. We need denser housing. And so then you can create environments more like, say, San Francisco, New York and stuff, where people live close to where they work.
Thank you, Ajit. Our next speaker will be Lydia Koo, to be followed by Pat Burt. So Lydia, your comments on programs or improvements to support bike commute goals.
Thank you. So one of the things is actually having the city take a revisit on their capital improvement projects. There are certain certain plans that are already in place for many of the areas that are unsafe for bicyclists, and we should be pushing that up on the priority list rather than some of the other projects that are being pushed forward right now. Second thing is having companies enforce their TDMs, transportation demand management, and that the city should enforce them so that there is commuters that are coming in on bicycles. Of course, that would need the public transportation bit of that too. Then, of course, there is more buy-in of companies on the transportation management TMAs, so that they are also funding it and coming up with programs. A good entity to learn from is from the Stanford Research Park.
Thank you, Lydia. Our next speaker will be Pat Burt, to be followed by Stephen Lee. Pat, your comments on
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So first, we need ubiquitous racks and charging stations for electric bikes and electric scooters on both public and private space on both of those. We need to improve bike safety and to make biking more efficient, and to make that both of those things happen, we need really dedicated bike arterials that are separated from cars, both east, south, and northwest. And one of the most important parts of that is to have better crossing across the Caltrain tracks. Highest priority for me has been, for a number of years, the initiative I put forward to have a Loma Verde underpass for bikes crossing Alma and the tracks. We need to bring back the funding in the capital plan that the city manager dropped, for instance, the Embarcadero improvements that I fought for, and they disappeared without any discussion. And we need to connect with neighboring cities to make real bike commuting stronger.
Thank you, Pat. Our next speaker will be Stephen Lee, to be followed by Greg Tanaka. Stephen, programs or improvements to support bike commute goals?
Yeah, so if we are serious about increasing the number of people who are biking to work and reducing our carbon emissions from commuting, then housing is fundamentally the biggest thing we can do as a city. We have a 3-to-1 jobs to housing imbalance. And so all of these other programs, if we don't address housing, are really just programs at the edges of it. So if we're serious about increasing the ability of people to use green transportation options, we need to enable and build dense housing along transit corridors and near where the jobs are in Palo Alto. Beyond that, we need to work on, I agree with Ed on this, we need to increase safety. I had an event with about 40 high school students who love biking around Palo Alto, but they simply do not feel safe. So we need to double down on our Safe Routes to School program. We need to ensure that we have dedicated and protected bike lanes. I would explore road diets, which provide that safety without impacting the actual car carrying capacity of those roads. And as a lawyer, I strongly believe we need to actually enforce our TDMs and work with employers to ensure that they are providing incentives for their employees to take greener transportation options.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker will be Greg Tanaka, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg. So Greg, go ahead.
Thank you, Robert. I did a survey early on trying to figure out why aren't more people biking. So for me, I bike all the time. My kids bike all the time. You know, definitely a very pro-bike family. And you know, what our survey said is really to get the next segment of people have to feel safe. Not just, it has to be not just safe, but they have to feel safe. And so I think programs like protected bike lanes or swapping the parked cars and the bike lane kind of thing, we're really getting more of the non-hardcore bikers biking. We're very privileged here to have great environment, very flat terrain. So it's a really great place to bike. I think the other piece is there are incentives for buying an electric car, but there aren't the same incentives for getting electric bikes. So that's something I've been pushing for on council, is to make it consistent across for all electric vehicles, not just cars. And I've also been pushing for scooter and bike shares, because I think that also facilitates more biking within our city. I think the other program that's really interesting is what the Stanford Research Park is doing in terms of paying employees to bike to work. I think that's another way of making more people bike. And I think by doing this, we can get more people like Ajit to sell the car and bike all the time.
Thank you, Greg. Our next speaker will be Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Carrie Templeton. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So I agree with this goal, but we need to realize that not everyone can afford a bike. We need to institute a bike share program that will make bikes affordable to all by making them free. We also should support our local bike shops to subsidize purchases of helmets and bike repair. We can pay for these things if we tax our largest businesses here in Palo Alto, including, ironically, car manufacturers like Ford and Tesla. Additionally, we need to have protected bike lanes like they have in Europe. Berlin is a fantastic model of this. We had plans for protected bike lanes, but our former and current city council completely dropped the ball by neither making plans nor funding this. Last February, a child at my son's school was actually killed by a construction driver in a residential neighborhood. So another thing we need to do is put a full stop onto huge construction projects in residential neighborhoods, like Castillea's proposed dangerous plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker will be Carrie Templeton, to be followed by Greer Stone. So the topic is programs or improvements to support bike commute goals. Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you so much. Several great ideas have been brought up, especially working on the Kingsley Embarcadero Emerson intersection. That has been something that council has neglected to address, even though it's been called out for many years. So I would love to see those improvements, specifically because so many students are coming through that intersection to get to Pali. However, I also harken back to some previous experiences, like Rebecca mentioned in Europe, having separated bike lanes where cars don't interact with the bikes at all, except in certain points, is really interesting. And we've seen it implemented at Google. They removed several large parking lots throughout the campus and made a dedicated bike and pedestrian route all around campus. And that really put an end to trying to drive around, because it would be much more time intensive to find a parking space than to hop on the bike that was right there and go where you need to go. So I'd like to see us take a serious look at getting creative with our bike separation potential here in Palo Alto, not just on the roads, on the existing roads, but maybe in places where they could be completely separated from cars. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Our last speaker on this topic will be Greer Stone. Greer?
This is a really important topic, and it really does come down to the ease of getting around on a bike, as well as the safety component. We can improve the ease by expanding our bike boulevards. We have a great bike boulevard here in Midtown, one that goes along Bryant, connecting the South and North Palo Alto, and a bike boulevard being planned in the College Terrace area, as well as in Ventura. We don't yet have a bike boulevard that is connecting the east and west portions of Palo Alto, and that really needs to improve. I agree with Pat as far as the Loma Verde undercrossing would be a great way to be able to make those connections. We do need physical barriers as well, and also just make it easier to be able to park your bike on public or private lands, requiring developers to be able to build those. I also think it's important when we're looking at workforce housing to be able to create housing for people who actually work and serve Palo Alto. The problem with just hoping that housing is going to be able to help this, 25% of employed Palo Altans only 25% of employed Palo Altans work in Palo Alto, and that trend will likely continue with future housing development.
Thank you, Greer. Our next question is a lightning round question, so please answer briefly with a simple yes or no, a phrase, or at most a sentence. And the first respondent will be Rebecca Eisenberg. So the question is, since 2010, Palo Alto has seen 2 bicycle fatalities, 9 pedestrian fatalities, 8 automobile fatalities, and about 60 serious injuries to vulnerable users of our streets. Would you support dedicating additional city resources to a focused Safe Streets for All or Vision Zero program to push these rates towards zero?
Absolutely. Yes, any risk of life is not acceptable, 100%.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker on this will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Carrie Templeton. Greer?
We must do everything to be able to keep our streets safe.
Thank you. Carrie, and then Ajit, and then Greg. Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you. These numbers are only what we have reported. My daughter and I were also hit in front of Fair Meadow on our bikes commuting from Ohlone. So I would say absolutely we need to have more funds and more awareness and education programs for biking. Yes.
Thank you. Next is Ajit, and then Greg.
Yes, so we definitely need to devote more resources to this. And I actually think we need to just solve the problems that we already know about, even beyond doing new analysis. There's a lot of things we can solve.
Thank you, Ajit. Next is Greg, followed by Raven.
Absolutely. One of my daughter's classmates from Green Middle School got killed like early in the year, and it's just tragic. So we need to do more to make sure kids are safe.
Thank you, Greg. Next is Raven Malone, followed by Lydia Koo.
Absolutely. Like Carrie said, this is only the things that we have reported. And since this has been going on since 2010, it's disappointing that it hasn't been happening sooner. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven. Next is Lydia Koo, to be followed by Ed Lowing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. Next is Ed Lowing, to be followed by Stephen Lee.
Yes. Why isn't this more alarming to the current council?
Next is Stephen Lee, to be followed by Pat Burt.
Yes, absolutely. And we need to have a sense of urgency to actually get this done and not let this fall to the typical Palo Alto process where it's dragged on forever and ever and nothing actually gets done.
Thank you, Stephen. And last is Pat Burt.
Yes, and the first thing we need to do is restore the funding that was in the capital plan that got pulled the last 2 years by the city manager with no real policy discussion by the council.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, for our next question, the first speaker will be Carrie Templeton. Integrated shuttle and bus system or other alternatives?
Thank you so much for this question. I was very disappointed that this shuttle system had to be turned off during the pandemic. I understand as people were staying home that we expected ridership to drop, but we should revisit that. It's very important for us to provide ways for people to get around that aren't their cars, because otherwise they will use their cars. So the ways we can address this, I look at VTA, for example, they address the whole county, and we're at the northern border of the county. And so many of our trips are potentially even on a different system. And when you look at things that are centered in our area, like the Marguerite, they have a lot more overlap with the destinations that Palo Altans have. So I keep thinking about ways for us to work together with private lines like the Marguerite, or potentially pulling in some of our corporate lines and finding ways to either get the corporations to help fund our local shuttle and providing the services they need. I think that's probably the best way to start. Since my timer's out, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I didn't give a chance to alert the next person, so I'm going to read the whole question again. The next speaker will be Lydia Koo, to be followed by Greer Stone, and the question is, the city has chosen to discontinue our local free shuttles, and VTA is reducing service. When and how should we bring back the shuttles? And what are your ideas for a cost-effective integrated shuttle and bus system or other alternatives? So Lydia, and then Greer after that.
Thank you. It is unfortunate during our budget reductions, one of them was to cut the shuttle services. And there's a lot of people that depend on those, coming from downtown to La Comida for lunch and all of that, including some of the students who uses the shuttle. So it's very unfortunate that that was cut. We didn't have enough votes in order to keep it. But that is something that we should revisit. One of the things, as we're coming out of the pandemic, we should also be looking into a business tax, and the tax should be part of the solution in bringing back shuttles into our town. But I think that it needs to be expanded, not only on the main arterials, but also within the neighborhoods, so that for some elder folks, they could get on the shuttles as well. I'm just looking at the question. I think that's, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. Our next speaker will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Ajit Varma. Greer?
Yeah, I'll kind of take the baton from Lydia and thank her for pointing out that difficulty with our shuttle system and all bus systems is that it's so difficult for senior citizens who rely on public transportation to be able to do their shopping, to be able to get from the front door of their homes to oftentimes main arteries within a town to be able to get onto a shuttle. So we need to be able to explore ways to be able to kind of fix that first mile, last mile problem with those type of issues. I also was really frustrated with council's decision to cut not only a bunch of essential city services, but also the shuttle program. We really should be looking at better ways to be able to partner with neighboring jurisdictions to see can we form a shuttle system together that's going to be able to promote greater use of public transportation. I think the business tax is one of the ways in which we can fund that, and this is critically important since the VTA continues to cut service from North County and Palo Alto.
Thank you, Greer. Our next speaker will be Ajit Varma, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg. Ajit, shuttles and buses?
So I think it was sad that they were cut, but I think it's also a necessity given the health crisis that we're in, reducing spread of COVID. Like there's just a lot of difficulties in making this happen along with the budget. But I do think that this is something that we will be able to fix as soon as things get up and running, which we should try to make happen as soon as possible. So I've taken the shuttle from my house to work on my corporate shuttle many times. It's 90% empty. I've taken the local shuttle and it's also 90% empty. And so you see all these like similar routes that seem to be very inefficient in terms of like how they're operating. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with private corporations who are very motivated to providing these services. And in return, we give them various concessions so that we can work with them to create a sustainable and practical, cost-effective system for everybody who lives in the city. And I think this is very achievable if we just have those conversations.
Thank you, Ajit. Our next speaker will be Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Stephen Lee on shuttles and buses.
Palo Alto, one of the wealthiest cities in the world. We can afford a robust system of electric shuttles. Palo Alto is the only city in California with businesses that doesn't have a business tax. Our current and former city councils voted 7-0 against taxing Palantir and Tesla, putting the entire cost of the recovery on residents. Until we're able to tax these large companies that have profited from the pandemic, we can work with current employers to provide these shuttles. Tesla is right here in Palo Alto. I promise you, I will pick up the phone and call them and ask them if they can lend us some electric shuttles. I'm glad Carrie mentioned the Marguerite because Santa Clara required Stanford to provide the Marguerite as part of the general use permit that Santa Clara extended to Stanford. Every time we approve a business or a private school, we can require shuttles too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Next will be Stephen Lee, to be followed by Pat Burt. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I thought cutting the shuttle program was a big mistake that our current council made. And it provides an essential service, an essential way for many members of our community, especially those who don't have other options, to actually get around and do their business. This speaks to the need for a business tax, and I agree wholeheartedly with Rebecca Eisenberg. We need a business tax now, especially during COVID-19, as we are asking families and small businesses to do more with less. Why wouldn't we ask our larger businesses who are doing quite well during COVID-19 to step up and pay their fair share? Why wait until COVID-19 is over to ask them to step up and help preserve these essential services? I also agree with Ajit that we need to work with private corporations. Something like 80,000 people commuted on these private bus lines prior to COVID-19, which shows the huge failure of our public institutions to get serious about public transit. And in terms of working with VTA, we need to build denser housing along transit corridors so that it makes it viable for VTA to provide services to our community.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker will be Pat Burt, to be followed by Raven Malone. Pat?
So yes, we need to restore our shuttle and expand it. And the key is the funding. It did not need to be abolished in this last budget cycle. We have a record-setting infrastructure fund, twice as large as we've ever spent in a single year, scheduled for this year, and we slashed services to pay for it. That was the wrong set of priorities. It should be putting people first. In 2016, I initiated a council committee on the business tax, and had a 9-0 vote by the council to proceed on it. In 2017 for the 2018 ballot, the new pro-development majority reversed themselves after I left office. So in 2018 and 2019, I pushed that forward with a citizens committee. We had designed that 2/3 of dollars would go toward transportation, which would allow for an expanded shuttle system and expanded TMA citywide to subsidize transit passes for low-income workers and expanded affordable housing. So we can do all that, and it has to be done.
Thank you, Pat. Our next speaker will be Raven Malone, followed by Ed Lowing, and the topic is shuttles and buses.
To improve our public transit in general, bring back more shuttles, look into light rails, and improve our bike infrastructure to make it easier to get around Palo Alto without a car. I think it was really unfortunate that the shuttle was defunded. I understand the safety need to pause it, but it was defunded. We need to look into bringing back our shuttle system, but with more shuttles, with more routes, more stops, so that it lets people move more efficiently throughout the city. I do agree with Ajit and Stephen that we should work with corporations here in order to make this happen, and also look at a business tax that only taxes the large businesses in the area that have more than 50 or 60 employees, and use that revenue for various things in the city, and that includes funding affordable housing as well as creating better public transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven. Our next speaker will be Ed Lowing, to be followed by Greg Tanaka. Ed?
Yes, what hasn't been mentioned yet is that this question ties very tightly back to the other question, I think 2 questions ago, when we said, what can we do to get people on bikes? Well, one of the problems of getting people on bikes is they have too far to go, but if they could drive to the bus and take the bus or the shuttle, a long ways and then take their bike off, then you're being able to kind of complete the loop for them. So it fits right in with that. I think everyone's basically commented on the shuttle. It was shut down for monetary reasons, more so than for pandemic reasons, but we could be putting it back in right now and start planning what that's going to look like. So the horizon that it takes to get something done means we should be jumping on it right now. And I strongly believe that we should take a broader view than just in Palo Alto, as I think Greer mentioned primarily. This needs to be regional so that it's really understood and in that sense sort of marketed and communicated to the citizens that there's really a functional system there now.
Thank you, Ed. Our last speaker on this topic will be Greg Tanaka. Go ahead, Greg.
I voted against cutting the shuttles during the budget hearings. It didn't make sense. Our kids use it to go to school. To Green Middle School as an example. And there was money actually. So, the city manager a few weeks later proposed that we spend $1 million on marketing graphics for our utility bills, which, we have to say, well, do we want a shuttle system for our kids or do we want to have better graphics for our utility bills? That's a monopoly. To me, it's pretty clear. And then, does it make sense to spend $1 million a year on PR people? I don't know. I think, is it better to have $1 million worth of PR people, or is it better to have money for our kids' shuttle? So to me, that was very clear. Now, the one big issue is VTA. San Jose dominates it. We fund the heck out of it, but we don't get much representation or much service. So we need to fix that problem. I think the other opportunity here is, I'm not sure if many people have been to downtown Las Vegas, but downtown Las Vegas, you can take an Uber there and it's free. It's a free ride there. And then you have to pay for it on the way back. But so there's these kind of programs are like Uber Hop in Seattle, which is like a virtual bus network. So I think there's ways to partner with our local companies like Uber and Lyft to create a workable, more highly utilized bus system.
Thank you, Greg. For our next topic, the first responding council candidate will be Ed Lowing. And here's the question. The high cost of living in Palo Alto, combined with the lack of affordable housing, means that many lower income and younger workers commute long distances. What policies should Palo Alto be adopting to make it easier and less expensive for workers to commute without relying on solo automobile trips? So as I said, their first speaker will be Ed Lowing, to be followed by Greer Stone. Ed?
It sounded like 2 different questions, so I'll jump in and tell me if I missed one of them.
What, do you want me to read it again?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so there's a high cost of living, and so younger and and lower income workers end up commuting long distances because they can't live nearby. What policies should Palo Alto be adopting to make it easier and less expensive for workers to commute without relying on solo automobile trips?
Okay, so the obvious blanket answer there is to have affordable units in town. So which is my top priority, and that has to have laser beam focus. We have to be totally committed to that, or else forget about it and tell the citizens we don't care. So we have to work on that one with tons of focus and find new ways to build these things, and fast. That is, that solves most of those problems. The other ones are kind of periphery in the sense of trying to find people to, park out of the city and take shuttles in from distant lots. Worth a try. If we get our own shuttle in place to make that happen, and things along those lines. But obviously we want the train back up and running, and I think it will get financed because that's our only real high quality transportation that comes here.
Thank you, Ed. Our next speaker will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Pat Burt. The topic is supporting low income and new commuters, young commuters.
I agree with Ed. The obvious solution, and the one that we really need to be focusing on, is creating housing for lower income workers and workforce housing for those who serve our community, but who cannot afford to be able to live here. I teach at both Pally and Gunn, and the janitor that comes into my room at Pally every day, he and his family live in San Jose. They're planning on moving all the way out to Stockton and continuing to commute in. Not only is that detrimental to their own well-being, but also to our environment and our traffic. So we were able to create the housing here in Palo Alto for these type of workers who actually work here and serve our community. That could have a really positive impact. Also, having a transportation demand management system that does actually have teeth, and that is requiring developers and these offices to be able to make sure that they're providing incentives for their employees to be taking public transportation, can also help.
Thank you, Greer. Our next speaker will be Pat Burt, to be followed by Raven Malone. Pat?
Yes, two ways to address this. The first is by having subsidies for those workers to be able to have transit and car pool apps, and the other is a greater amount of affordable housing in the community, not only for low income, but for workforce housing. So on the first one, we have the successful pilot program of the Transportation Management Association for the downtown area. We found that the greatest need was actually the low income workers. Transit passes and rideshare apps had a significant impact for them. But that was supposed to be funded by the business community, and they haven't been willing to step up. That was one of the major areas of the business tax intention, was to expand that citywide. The second is on the low-income housing, and that was also both the business tax and the impact fees that we adopted in 2016, and the new Pro-Development Council reversed. And those impact fees are also what Stanford uses for low-income housing, or the county uses and imposes on Stanford.
Thank you, Pat. Our next speaker is Raven Malone, to be followed by Stephen Lee on reducing solo automobile trips for low-income commuters.
Palo Alto's lack of affordable housing means that many people who work here, including service workers, teachers, and first responders, can't afford to live here. Actually, only our police chief out of all of our first responders, that's the only person who lives here. We need to produce enough housing to meet the demand and make sure that enough of this housing is actually affordable for these workers. And removing this barrier will prevent long commutes from needing to happen in the first place. On top of this, we need to improve public transit, bring back more shuttles, look into light rails, and improve our biking infrastructure to make it easier to get around Palo Alto. And without a car, it's a dance. You can't bring more commercial development without housing. You can't bring on more housing without creating better infrastructure to handle the traffic and better public transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven. Our next speaker will be Stephen Lee, to be followed by Ajit Varma. Stephen?
Yeah, I'm going to challenge some of the assumptions in the question a little bit. I think from an environmental standpoint, we need to reduce the commuting time for all workers. And the way that we do that is by addressing our 3-to-1 jobs to housing imbalance. And that includes low income and young communities, but that includes people who would be in market rate housing. So we need to get serious about building market rate and affordable housing. We need to do that by getting rid of exclusionary zoning. We need to enable dense housing near transit corridors and in job centers by reevaluating our parking requirements and height limits. We need to look at how do we leverage land owned by government and by faith-based communities and build workforce housing at places like Cubberley. But fundamentally, we need to reduce the environmental impact from everyone commuting and not just low-income individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker will be Ajit Varma, to be followed by Lydia Koo. Ajit?
So as a few people mentioned, I would just again echo that we should solve the underlying problem and make Palo Alto affordable is like the first thing that I would focus on. Is that means dense housing in the right areas. There's other things that I think we can also do as well. So we have north-south public transportation with Caltrain, but East Bay is actually very difficult for people to commute from. And I think a lot of people are commuting from the area. And so you see efforts that have been attempted, like the Dumbarton Rail, like resurrecting that. That was an effort that Facebook was going to do. So a private company basically working with public entities in order to resurrect these public transportation. So I think that that's very valuable. I also think that there's a lot of technology that we can put to play here. So things like Uber Pool and ride sharing, it almost is going to soon become cheaper to ride with other people and convenient as well compared to riding in your own car. So there's a lot of things that I think we'll do with both technology and working with private companies to solve this problem.
Thank you, Ajit. Our next speaker is Lydia Koo, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg.
Yes. So first, I would want to see our policy to redefine the term affordable to indicate it is for below 80% AMI versus what we have now at 120% AMI. Then I would want to reinstitute the PAMA fix so it applies to for rent apartments so that they would have to provide the inclusionary housing as well. And then there is also to increase the inclusionary rate in each of these developments for both rentals as well as for sale to 27%. There's a study in San Francisco that shows in order to balance out and to even out the market, the luxury ones and the below market, it has to be at about 27%. Then I would also lobby the state legislatures to disperse big companies, their jobs to be in areas with lower housing costs. I have more, but okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, only a minute each. All right, our next speaker will, thank you, Lydia. Our next speaker will be Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Greg Tanaka.
Hi, you asked about very low income housing. And so I want to clarify first that very low income housing is defined very clearly by our state and by RENA as one of the 3 different types of housing: very low income, and moderate. When it comes to very low income housing, our city has done an outrageously horrible job, has approved only 43 units of very low income housing over the past 8 years. So that's not just this current city council, it was the previous city councils as well. Those 43 units has led us to actually having a 7-to-1 jobs to homes ratio when it comes to our very lowest paid workers. These are the folks that most of all need housing near jobs. I'm supported by all local labor unions, including SEIU 521 and the South Bay AFL-CIO Labor Council, because they are counting on me and I will deliver to them affordable housing near jobs and transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker will be Greg Tanaka, to be followed by Carrie Templeton.
So there's definitely a big issue with the socioeconomic diversity, especially for our lower income workers. It's very, very tough for working professionals in our city. One of the easy ways is actually having smaller units near transit. They're intrinsically more affordable. I spoke about expanding the TDM and teammate programs to do things like pay to bike, go pass subsidies, VTA type subsidies. There's also ideas around doing subsidized Uber, Lyft carpools. So that's a nice, easy way of actually getting more of a dynamic virtual kind of bus system. It's more affordable for our low-income workers. And if we actually look at a close look at VTA, in the last report I looked at, it was something like $38 per ride. I mean, it was so incredibly expensive in terms of what it cost VTA to provide, or like per person, per rider, per ride. And we don't get much service here in our city. So really we should take that money back from VTA and spend it in our city to actually help the people here. I've also been endorsed by the local labor union, South Bay Labor, as well as ACIU, mainly for the work that I've been doing and trying to help them.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Our next speaker will be Carrie Templeton.
Hi, thank you. I just want to echo what previous speakers have said about the importance of housing as it relates to this issue. And I think they've covered it very well. So I want to talk about things we can do on the transit side. So one of the challenges we have is how many different transit organizations are involved in the whole Bay Area. And I mean, this is just even talking about public ones, but we also have private transit systems as well. So it gets pretty complicated and they don't all interoperate very effectively. And this is a challenge that we've seen contrasted in other communities. I'm thinking again back to my experiences living in Germany, and things were much more interoperable between the bus and the train and things like that. So I'd really like to see us work better. I have a lot of strong relationships in the Bay Area and be happy to work on that. And then we also need to have better last mile support between the bus and train stops versus being able to get from there with our bikes and scooters to the destination. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Our last question before our wrap up is going to be a flash question, but it's kind of a special one. It actually has two parts to this question. So you get 2 sentences to answer it. And so the first speaker on this will be Stephen Lee, but first I'll give you the question, I'll give you my answer, and then Stephen can go after that. So the question is, where does the city have a parking problem? Name one parking problem, and what is your solution? So my personal answer is, the parking problem for me is insecure bike rack parking at the train stations. And the solution would be installing secure bike e-lockers. So what is your parking problem and what is your solution? We'll start with Steve, and next will be Carrie Templeton. Go ahead, Steve.
And are you talking only about bike parking or?
Parking, all kinds. Whatever is the most important, you can take it any direction you want.
Yeah, I mean, I would say our biggest parking problem is near our downtown area. You know, we need to make sure that we are looking after our residents in in those surrounding neighborhoods, and really work with our employers to find ways to make sure that their employees are using greener, non-vehicular transportation options. So I would say that area.
Thank you, Stephen. This is meant to be a quick question.
Gotcha.
So try to be concise, but it's easy to go on and on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next is Carrie Templeton, followed by Ed Lowing.
Great. And I heard the question as, where do we have a parking problem? Not necessarily the biggest one. And in my neighborhood in Barron Park, we have a problem that has been passed on to us from Stanford, where people are parking in our neighborhood and biking on the bike path over to Stanford because they aren't able to park there. So I'd like to find a way to resolve that where it's equitable for the Palo Alto residents and not taken advantage of. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. Next will be Ed Lowing, followed by Greer Stone.
Well, you took my answer, Robert, so I'm gonna have to go a different direction here. I think there's a parking problem downtown that can be corrected by putting up electronic wayfinding signs so that people are not driving around in circles, putting out greenhouse gases.
Thank you, Ed. Next will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg.
Yeah, I would say commercial parking intrusion inside residential neighborhoods, and how that, I think, incentivizes commuters to take single occupancy vehicles into Palo Alto. We should make that more difficult and encourage public transportation use.
Thank you, Greer. Next will be Rebecca, followed by Pat Burt.
As long as our city council keeps approving these huge companies, more and more big office spaces that intrude upon residential areas, we're going to have a parking problem. We need to have them force their employees to park in lots off of 101 and 280 and bring their employees in with shuttles. Parking problem.
Thank you, Rebecca. So Pat, your parking problem and then your solution.
So I I agree that the most cost-effective approach to any parking problems we have in the city is to make bike parking ubiquitous and easy right in front of where our destinations are. So it'd be more convenient to bike than to drive, and it's a fraction of the cost of $100,000 per parking space.
Thank you, Pat. Next will be Lydia Koo, to be followed by Ajit Varma. Lydia?
So I would have to agree with what Rebecca said, except that I would say at the towards the end is that to have the city enforce all the buildings, all the developers to build their own sufficient parking spaces.
Thank you, Lydia. Next will be Ajit Varma, followed by Greg Tanaka.
So I found that especially in dense areas or some areas like downtown, we don't have enough bike racks. So especially for things like electric bikes and stuff, it's very difficult to park in those areas. So I would improve that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajit. Next is Greg, to be followed by Raven Malone.
Robert, I have to agree with you. I've had 2 bikes stolen here in Palo Alto. It's one of the reasons why some people don't bike. We need to make it easier for people to lock up the bikes more securely and more prevalent. Just one of the reasons why I started skateboarding, so I don't have to worry about parking my bike.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Last is Raven Malone.
So I think that a problem is parking downtown. Many people complain about not being able to find parking there. The problem is there is parking downtown, so I propose signs pointing to the nearest parking garages and showing how many spots are available.
Thank you, Raven. While you were answering that question, someone helpfully told me on the chat that Caltrain is going to install e-lockers for people like me, so I'm thrilled to hear that. Okay, so we're down to our last question, asking our candidates to sum up their positions on green transportation and how they'll make a difference in City Council. Our first speaker will be Greer Stone, to be followed by Carrie Templeton. Greer?
Thank you, Robert, and everyone else for hosting this forum today. It's been a pleasure being able to talk to everybody and kind of geek out on green transportation, something that I think we're all pretty passionate about. And it's nice to see all of us candidates seem to agree that these are important issues for our city. I think it's so clear with the state of the world and the Bay Area today that climate change is an existential threat to not only to our future, but our current lives. And it's what we're seeing right now with the fires and having to live with the smoke-filled air every single day. So these are issues that are incredibly important to me. I grew up the son of a Yosemite Park ranger. The idea of conservation and creating a planet that is sustainable for ourselves and for our future generations is so important to me. That's why I am endorsed by the Sierra Club, and I'm really looking forward to working with people like all of you to make sure that we can have a green and sustainable city for years to come. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Greer. Next will be Carrie Templeton, to be followed by Stephen Lee. Carrie?
Thank you. All right, to sum up, for green transit, I am very supportive. I want to see us really invest more in our bike and pedestrian plan, and our sustainability and climate action plan. I think we have great ideas, but we need to follow them through. We need council members who will commit to that, and I'm one of those. I think we can do incentivizing programs to use more public transit and ease traffic. Things that I'm really excited about are potentially free bus passes for our seniors and our students. One, to make it easier for the seniors to get around more independently, and two, for our students to learn the lifelong skill of being able to navigate on public transit. I think those would be really helpful. I also want to work on encouraging more electric vehicles in town by making it easier to install chargers and in public places, in private parking lots, and at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie. Next will be Stephen Lee, to be followed by Ajit Varma. Stephen?
Well, thank you so much for having us this afternoon. You know, at the risk of beating a dead horse down, it's all about housing, housing, housing. Housing is so inextricably linked to many of the issues we care about. So if we care about addressing climate change, reducing traffic, reducing CO2, creating the density we need to actually support mass transit, whether it's Caltrain, VTA, or shuttle programs, we need to get serious about housing. And we need to reduce the barriers to make it easier, safer, and more enjoyable for folks to bike and walk around our wonderful community. You know, I'm endorsed by Carbon Free Palo Alto, the League of Conservation Voters, and the County Democratic Party. And I think that we need new leadership on our council to get actually serious about addressing some of these issues. And I hope I can count on everyone's vote this coming November. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker will be Ajit Varma, to be followed by Pat Burt.
Thank you. So I would love to do something extraordinary and something that no cities have done before. We have some of the greatest technology companies here, and they're investing in self-driving technology. Waymo, Tesla, Aurora. And I think that we could really think of some cool ideas, like would it be feasible to have only households own a single car, and additional transportation has to be shared? And if you look at like how much money people put into cars, like it's an asset that just sits on the road most of the time. And you see all these like transportation startups and their companies, and they're rethinking how transportation works. And I think most of these companies would be very eager to work with us. And so in this model of things like self-driving cars and technology, I think you can make it so that we can actually live with much more shared resource and shared transportations. This is also very helpful for bicycles, because a lot of these technologies have things like radar, LiDAR, image processing that make it much safer for bicyclists as well.
Thank you, Ajit. Next will be Pat Burt, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg for your sum up. Go ahead, Pat.
Thanks. Green transportation really is not only an issue of how do we have a more easy to move community and a more valuable community, a better quality of life, and less congestion, less parking problems, but we haven't really touched much on the critical greenhouse gas impacts. We have our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan with our 80% reduction goal by 2030, and our staff has analyzed it and indicated that the remainder is 2/3 our transportation, and the biggest thing we can do is remove internal combustion engines. So electrification and alternative transportation is the bulk of it. Unfortunately, the housing is very important, but it's only about 15% of our reductions that we can be achieved through vehicle miles traveled. We have to electrify and have all of our transportation system zero emission soon.
Thank you, Pat. Next will be Rebecca Eisenberg, followed by Raven Malone.
This afternoon was awesome. We united on a shared vision for Palo Alto: safe, protected bike lanes, pedestrian bridges, a robust system of electric shuttles, support of existing transit, such as Caltrain. I personally support putting Caltrain underground in a tunnel or up on a viaduct so that people on the surface in bikes and on their feet can be far more safe. Bike share programs, including those that provide bikes and helmets to residents that can't afford it, more closed city streets, and lots of housing near jobs so that people don't have to commute so far, which will protect our environment and greatly include our quality of life for everyone in the city. I agree that City Council, I know we all agree that current and former city ground has completely dropped the ball on this. I would be thrilled to work with any of these, my fellow candidates. I know that together we can make Palo Alto a model city on green initiatives. Please join me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next will be Raven Malone, followed by Greg Tanaka.
It's important that any leader listens to everyone's perspective in the community they serve, and I'm committed to working with the community by listening. Safety is always the priority, but it's important that everyone is included in the decision making. Changes should be made in order to encourage greener transportation, and any future plans to changing streets should include proactive notices to neighbors, town halls, for areas where changes are being considered, and more online outreach. We need to be willing to also be more innovative when it comes to coming up with solutions to the transportation problem, and work with cities in the Bay Area so that we can create a transportation system that benefits the whole area. The transportation problem in the Bay Area isn't Palo Alto's alone, it's within the Bay Area. Thank you all for having me, and I hope to earn your support this November. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven. Next will be Greg Tanaka, to be followed by Lydia Koo. Greg?
Robert, thank you so much for holding this great forum and being channeling your inner Joe Smithian. Awesome job. This is one of my favorite topics. I love biking. I love talking about biking. You know, right now, Palo Alto is facing an unprecedented interlocking challenge with this public health emergency that's driving this economic crisis for us. And so, to meet these challenges about preserving our quality of life, and to keep Palo Alto vibrant and safe, we're going to have vigilance, sensible spending, a recovery plan that will allow us to start investing more into our green transportation. The scooter share program that I champion still hasn't happened yet because of this pandemic, but I think it will happen once we have the recovery plan in place. I have the skills and experience to help with the city with all three. This is one of the reasons why I have double number of endorsements versus the next closest candidate, including the League of Conservation Voters. I will make the city work for all of you by getting more people biking in our city, by making them feel safe. Thank you so much for the opportunity today, Robert.
You're welcome, Greg. Next will be Lydia Koo, to be followed by Ed Lowing.
So first, I do want to say thank you to the entire committee and the organization. And Robert, great job on moderating. I just want to say that people's environments are primary. And we have seen that from this COVID pandemic that a lot of people are using more of the open space and more bicycling and walking locally. It's all about localism. So in moving forward, we do want to explore different options for different people and recognize and respect people for their views and how they want to take transportation. At the same time, education is very imperative. But lastly, I just want to say that everything goes hand in hand. It's not just bicycling or reducing car traffic. It's also looking at the natural environment. So I feel very greatly that we need to have more of trees and preserve our natural environment in all of this to keep it green.
Thank you, Lydia. Our last speaker will be Ed Lowing, and then I'll have some wrap-up notes at the end. So Ed, go ahead. Ed, we lost your microphone.
I'm off.
There you are.
Okay, I wasn't muted. Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes, I think so. Okay.
All right, we'll give it a go here. It's the second time this happened on the broadcast. I'm saying that is correct. Still can't hear me?
It's not clear.
Oh, well, I'll keep talking and see if we can pick it up.
Okay.
I'm saying that is correct. This is about quality of life in Palo Alto. And of the things in summary that we've chatted about, I think affordable housing near offices makes eminent sense. I talked about safety, getting there safely and parking safely, parking your bike safely. We have to reduce the SOVs, and it's not just bikes. It's other kinds of vehicles besides bikes. And fourthly, I think that the shuttles have to be regional. So I'm very happy to have the Sierra Club endorsement thanking me for my work so far on these problems. And I've dealt with a lot of complex problems. I'm ready to jump in on this one as well.
Okay, thank you, Ed. That concludes our forum. Let me give the audience a little more information. First of all, if you want to find out more about any candidate, they each have a website, and you can go to their websites and find out their positions on these issues and other issues as well. A recording of this forum will be put online at, there will be a link from www.walkbikepaloalto, one big word, .org. And also, if you go to walkbikepaloalto.org, you can find the candidate responses to all of the questionnaire which we gave them ahead of this forum, and there's some more interest, a few other topics that we asked them about at that time. In his last response, Burt mentioned electric cars, and I think we chose not to touch on electrification of transportation in this forum, but there is a sustainability forum on Tuesday, and I fully expect that they will be discussing electrification of cars and everything else at that forum. So I hope if you're interested in that you can join that forum. I think the Palo Alto Weekly has a list of all of these kinds of events if you want to find that. I want to thank again all of the candidates for their commitment to our city and our democracy, and through their participation in this forum and throughout these months of campaigning, and their full commitment to serving should they be elected. I also want to thank our sponsors, Silicon Valley Bike Coalition, bikesiliconvalley.org, works to make biking safer and more comfortable in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties through education, advocacy, and fun. They helped organize this, and they also, if you're interested in advocating in Palo Alto, they're a good organization for finding out how to do that. Besides John Cordis, who is our local Palo Alto liaison, we've also been helped by Sandia Lada and Emma Schlaze. Walk Bike Palo Alto is our group of local systems that's put this together, including this questionnaire and now this forum. If you're interested in promoting walking and biking in Palo Alto with this local group, which is walking and bicycling and more generally active transportation, then please get in touch. These individuals are myself, Arnaud Bolenz, Elizabeth Greenfield, Nicole Zoeller Bolenz, Frank Vigiano, and Kathy Durham. So thank you all for participating and for listening and for joining us for this forum.